The ANC has systematically been transferring SA's sovereign assets and wealth into its own pockets. Privatise the damn SAA, you said. Time and again, whenever the latest scandal or disaster hit the embattled flagship carrier, you wanted ANC to privatise it. Little did you know that that is exactly what they wanted you to say, and now the ANC has simply pocketed South Africa's flagship asset, because that is what you thought you wanted. SA News have said many times before how the ANC under leadership of International Socialism stole South Africa using one word, racism, but control of SA was never their main aim. It was always about stealing the country's assets. SA News will over a series of articles reveal how the ANC, or at least its masters, have always been about money, power and control. We will connect the dots on 5 major BBBEE deals which benefited the ANC itself and show how BEE itself is nothing other than a cash vacuum cleaner into the cadre's pockets, dressed as anti-racism. In fact, anti-racism itself is part of the scam and is used to create the problems which make you so desperate for the ANC to act. First, however, in order to see this weapon or pattern of control and plunder, you must know how communism and thus the ANC works. Problem, reaction, solution. It's known as the Hegelian dialectic. Once you understand it, the blinds will come off and you will suddenly see this pattern everywhere. Secondly, as they always say of communism, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Communism always fails because at that moment when wealth or assets or means of production need to be transferred to the state so that the people can own it, greed sets in and capitalism wins. This is how oligarchs are created and nations destroyed. Thirdly, how it all fits into the bigger globalist picture, meaning the ANC is merely there to pretend there is control or governance, when in reality the country was thrown to the dogs long ago and will be kept there until the globalists are ready to implement their plans with it. They really do not care who it is that steals or consumes all the wealth, as long as it is not white people, who would build a regional superpower again, which is why white exceptionalism is the enemy of globalism. SA News will show how most recently the ANC itself took the SAA, setting up front companies, utilizing parastatals like the Public Investment Corporation, PIC, to bag themselves the country's flagship carrier, and also make themselves the official Capitec BEE partner, creating billions in wealth with a mere pen stroke, in fraudulent state capture to end all state captures. The corrupt ANC has over the last 2 decades systematically transferred SA's sovereign assets and wealth into their own private pockets, creating oligarchs, just like what happened after the fall of the USSR. Individuals with stupendous amounts of money, which actually belongs to the people of the country, like the owner of the Chelsea Football Club, Roman Abramovich. Just like Abramovich, it involves being in the right place at the right time when the parastatal is deliberately collapsed. It is a long-term plan which includes making the parastatal bankrupt so they can then take it over without too much fuss. But it is done incrementally, which is another communist weapon, not to attract too much attention, until everyone just accepts the inevitable capture or takeover of the state asset. Like wars, these acts of stealing national assets are also usually accompanied by rumors of people being taken out. And with that kind of money at stake, is it any wonder? Sometimes incrementalism can span generations, so people are not even aware of the change. If you look at so many issues today, like big government, mass immigration and open borders, government ownership and control of mainstream media, enforced mixed schools, abortion free on demand, LGBT deviancy, etc., etc., and all those far left-wing virtues which are enforced today, without any of us ever actually being asked. As they say, today's conservative would have been called a raging liberal just a few decades ago. However, all these virtues, which cause masses of personal and communal trauma and conflict, are just to distract and destroy the fabric of society and thus dissolve the cohesion of our society, making it easier to take over and plunder. That is the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution, a basic tenet of communism. However, whenever pure communism is being implemented, where everything is nationalized and transferred into state ownership, those in power, like the ANC, like to think that they are being noble, but at a crucial juncture, when the problem has become so severe and catastrophic, they pounce and slide it into their own pockets instead of the people's. Essentially, it boils down to aggravating a problem so badly that the two or more opposing sides happily accept any pre-planned solution you offer. Racism is such a perfect tool for this, which is why the ANC, the Democrats and left-wingers globally are constantly fomenting race hatred. The self-inflicted bankruptcy of the SAA is the problem, and they really drive it far beyond normal limits, causing people to get completely fed up and frustrated and desperate, calling just for it to be privatized, which is their reaction. Then they come in with their solution, taking it into private ownership of the ANC cadres, which was always the intention. They just needed to manufacture your consent first. However, whether the Bantu have the capacity to do this successfully or just create another humanitarian disaster like all other despots in Africa have before them is another story. But it does appear they are being assisted by a cabal of Indians, as Malema put it, and also international socialists or the deep state, who have always worked towards centralizing power, wealth and control in the hands of a few elites. Already Joe Biden is drooling over Ramaphosa, and no doubt Ramaphosa is salivating at all the billions about to come his way. These world supremacists or communists have employed the simple strategy of create a problem, wait for the reaction, then implement your solution, ever since they left New York in a ship with a few bars of gold to start a revolution in Russia in the early 1900s. To illustrate this, we have followed the dots on 5 major BBBEE deals that benefited the ANC itself and its cadres: the Capitec Con, the SAA Steel, the Petro SA Plunder, the Telkom Take-A-Lot and the Lebasha Loot. 5 deals, billions gained in assets and profits for supposed BEE beneficiaries. However, the presence of one man, Tshepo Moshluhle, seems to suggest he is an ANC bagman, directing front companies and deals for the benefit of the ANC itself and its elites. The recently announced transaction in which the bankrupt SAA was acquired, or simply given to a company called Harris General Partners, set off alarm bells all over the place. This was the last stage of the problem, reaction, solution paradigm, which we have all borne witness to in news headlines over the last 2 decades. Sources immediately began leaking that Harith was indeed an ANC front set up under the Mbeki administration, because the facts in this deal made no sense at all. Harith supposedly will commit $3 billion to revive SAA, but SAA will likely receive about $14 billion from the government. How does it make sense that a minority partner pays the huge majority using taxpayers' funds? All attention turned to the recipient of this flagship parastatal, supposed new owner of the massive Harith windfall, a man called Tshepo Moshluhle. When all the dots are connected, and this article will connect some of them, there is little doubt that Moshluhle is a bagman, moneyman and front for a criminal racketeering organization called the ANC. Pravin Gordhan used to tell us to connect the dots during the Gupta years to expose the con, but he was too much of a coward to connect them for us, and now we know why. Gordhan could not connect the dots in the Guptas publicly, though he knew what was happening, because his faction, that of Mbeki and Ramaphosa, was no better and were doing exactly the same. In fact, they were competing with the Guptas, so their exposure of the Guptas was not from some noble source, but merely removing their competition. Let's follow the dots below step by step. With the state capture of state-owned institutions and the active participation of the ANC party in the economy and private companies in South Africa, the ANC has been both participant and referee in the economy, which is a flagrant conflict of interest. The ANC and their leaders always actively participated in major government acquisitions, and behind the scenes also in the private sector, whilst the ANC government was also the referee, who could determine who gets which slice of the pie. This is what fueled the tenderpreneur phenomenon. Thabo Mbeki said in 1999, "Since 1994, the ANC government's priority has been to develop a black capitalist class or black bourgeoisie elites in order to deracialize the ownership of productive property in our country." So now anti-racism is wealth acquisition, or as the communists would call it, redistribution of wealth. Except in this case, as in so many others, the people themselves do not see any of it, apart from a few token morsels. The elites use the Robin Hood justification of stealing from the rich to give to the poor, but is just a front, a lie to hide self-enrichment, which itself is justified by redistribution of wealth, which itself is justified by the equality narrative, which itself is an entirely false manufactured premise. If all the cells in your body were the same, you would have no heart nor brains, but be just a lump of cells, like a jellyfish. Society works the same way, and ironically, Mr. Communism himself, Karl Marx, stated that blacks excel at physical labor and activity, while Europeans excel at thinking and creating. Just when did equality of opportunity become equality of outcome? Modern liberalism is like running a race, all in different directions, but everyone wins. It is pathetically ludicrous, but the mainstream media have beat it into your heads until you perceive it as truth. The SAA steal. The conclusion that the ANC itself is the new de facto owner of SAA is supported by the central role that Tshepo Mashluhle played in 5 major BEE deals, where the ANC or senior ANC members were the major beneficiaries. The Public Investment Corporation, PIC, by its own admission still owns 30% in Harith General Partners, but it claims that it won't fund the SAA deal? It is very ironic that the Mpati Commission of Inquiry, set up by Cyril Ramaphosa to investigate state capture of the PIC, dedicated a whole chapter of its final report to the very Harith General Partners group. And yet here we are with the Ramaphosa administration appointing one of the cheap capturers of the PIC as the new owners of the SAA, without ever bothering to implement the recommendations of the Mpati Commission. Now we know why. There is little doubt that Harith was set up by the Mbeki administration to partake in the South African and African economy to ultimately benefit the ANC itself. Harith was set up when Brian Molefe headed the PIC and Tshepo Mashluhle was a senior PIC official. Jabu Moleketi was then the Deputy Minister of Finance and Chairman of the PIC. Harith Fund Managers was founded by former PIC Head of Corporate Finance, Tshepo Mashluhle, who was chosen by the PIC to establish the PAIDF, which would be an independent institution. The Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund, PAIDF, was planned by PAC and therefore the ANC itself, as the PIC was managed and controlled by the ANC government as well. Capital would flow to Harith and from there to the ANC. Businessmen like Mashluhle do not deny that they give money to the ANC, they just won't say how much. Moleketi was the first chairperson of Harith Fund Managers and then Harith General Partners. He also serves in other high-profile roles such as the chairperson of Vodacom Group. Mashluhle and Saxon World Shebeen crybaby, Brian Molefe, is so well connected that Mashluhle sold a house in the Cornwall Hill Estate in Pretoria to Molefe at a huge discount. Molefe paid only 10 million for the house, which was valued at 17 million, whilst Mashluhle had a firm offer for 14 million on the table from another prospective buyer. Molefe was known as Mbeki supporter before going over to the Zuma side, so he clearly learned his capture trade at the feet of the Mbeki ANC. In 2005, Mashluhle, on behalf of the PIC, but set up by the ANC, requested a mandate from the Government Employees Pension Fund, GEPF, to manage 1.65 billion rand in civil servant pension money in investments in African infrastructure projects. This was obviously granted, and the PIC set up Harith Fund Managers to manage a fund for these projects. Shortly thereafter, Mashluhle resigned from the PIC in 2006 and was then appointed as an external contractor to head the funds. The Mpati Commission found that Harith charged significantly high fees equal to more than 8% per year. There was also a big poison pill. If the PIC terminated Harith fund managers, it had to pay 12 months management fee and 13% of the market value of all investments. Management later bought a big stake in Harith from the PIC, but all transactions in South Africa are subject to ANC approval, and more than likely the ANC remains the chief beneficiary of Harith. The ANC has another well-known funding vehicle called Chancellor House, which made millions from its investment in Hitachi Power Africa, which had a contract to manufacture the boilers for the struggling Medupi and Kusile power stations. The Chancellor House investment in Hitachi was set up just for the Medupi and Kusile deal, and Chancellor House sold its stake in Hitachi after the conclusion of the Medupi and Kusile deal. The ANC made millions in profits. Chancellor House also owns Versterrer, a company supplying components to Eskom, where it has a steady supply deal. So the modus operandi is clear, and the PIC is and was the ANC's looting vehicle, from the Mbeki administration right through Zuma's term and into Ramaphosa's term. The PIC still has a large official shareholding in Harith, so how can the conclusion not be that the ANC itself now owns the SAA? The role of Tshepo Mashlushla in several BE deals, which channeled billions to the ANC itself, needs to be examined closely to understand why there is little doubt that the ANC itself controls Harith and thus also now de facto owns the SAA. That said, the chances of SAA now suddenly becoming profitable under black ownership are even slimmer. Please spread the awareness by sharing this article, and subscribe to our future articles for free by going to sa-news.com and signing up.